yeah, things are much better here.
All right, let's make a start. I'm going to say because we don't need to do any real prep, right? Um,
No, I don't think
no.
so.
All right, cool. So I'm going to say, hey, welcome, Matrix Live. We're chatting today with Alexey, who is Kitsune. You probably know him as Kitsune.
Hello. And everybody says kitsune, but in fact, back in Japan, they called kitsune. They don't stress the u vowel. They instead put the emphasis on the first one.
Ah,
So,
Kitsune. Okay.
which is why you better call me Alexey finally. Now
Yeah.
that I'm back from Japan,
So where in the world are you now?
right now I'm in a small town called Diemen, just on the outskirts of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And I moved here almost a year ago after I agreed to change employers and joined a nice company called Red Hat here in Amsterdam, dealing with the same area as before, telco, and basically building large systems for telecommunication operators, this time across EMEA.
Great. I mean, how do you like working at Red Hat? Are you allowed to say?
Yeah, to be honest, that's a company I've been longing to work for quite a bit of time because it's connected to open source. I'm an open source guy, so I'm really happy that I'm now surrounded, even virtually, by plenty of like-minded people. That's really reassuring, and that's really supporting me along the way.
Absolutely. I mean, they must have such deep Linux knowledge and reverence for the whole concept of open source.
Yeah, a lot of topics to talk about.
And what about Matrix? I'm going to think you're going to be pushing Matrix on them.
Yes, I will. In fact, there are quite a few Matrix aficionados inside Red Hat, but unfortunately, so far we are still using crappy as the primary medium of our communication. So that's certainly not the right way of doing things, as I see it. So yeah, I'm going to promote Matrix as much as I can within Red Hat, and hopefully we will get there.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think we've got a few feelers in Red Hat, but they're such a big and they're such an oil tanker to move around with their practices, I guess. But that's not why we're here today. You, in your Matrix travails, you've been working less on your quaternion and Qt work, so much as compared to the schema MSC. This is the idea that Matrix should have its own schema.
Well, I would say that if I spent more time on this MSC, I might completed it 1 year earlier. But since I'm still spending too much time playing around with code of Quaternion, well, priorities,
I see. Okay. So tell us, it's MSC2312. Why would you want that?
Yeah, so for the longest time, we've had that Matrix 2 service, and it served its purpose quite well for web-based clients, such as then, right, now Element. It's not serving its purpose quite well for non-browser-based clients, as everybody well knows. So Quaternion, WeChat, basically anything that runs outside of a browser is kind of a second-class citizen for Matrix 2. That's on one hand. And on the other hand, I thought back then it would be a much better branding for Matrix if instead of using some creepy website name, we were using a venerable Matrix URI scheme in place of HTTPS that can lead you virtually anywhere.
Yeah.
So I thought that it would be great if we could introduce Matrix kind of URIs into our ecosystem and, by extension, introduce the same across the web ecosystem in general. So you could send your URI to a favorite room inside WhatsApp or Telegram, or even just splash it on a web page, whichever means, whichever way you have to place URIs at.
Yep. So this is a dedicated schema specifically for Matrix, not just Matrix rooms, but can you target users as well?
Well, the thing is, in fact, this schema is mostly for integration. The way it's been originally intended, and the grounds for it were the well-known RFC 3986 that defines the foundation of any URI at all, as it stands right now. There are subsequent RFCs that further define how you can deal with internationalized URIs, etc. But 3986 is basically the core tenet around which any URI is built, any well-behaving URI is built. Yeah. And there are two primary purposes for which any URI exists. One is representation, and the other one is integration. Representation means that you can describe a location of a resource in a unified manner, using nothing but a pen and paper, by the way. Mm-hmm. So the RFC mentions a particular proverbial napkin use case where two colleagues in a bar chat on some topic that is interesting to both of them, and one of them wants the other to check out a particular resource somewhere in internet. And in order to pinpoint to that resource, it takes a napkin and writes down the address, the URI as we know it, the URL or the URI. And that's basically the one foundational use case that URIs ever exist. Any URI, HTTPS covers the same.
Yeah. So it needs to be unique,
kind of use
and
case.
It needs to have a single destination. It needs to one-to-one match.
Yeah, it should be unambiguous,
yep.
And it should unambiguously identify which resource it's pointing to, and should be simple enough mm-hmm. for a human to just like write it down on a piece of paper.
Indeed.
There was kind of workarounds made for non-English alphabets further on and so on, but these were extensions.
Okay.
And now the second purpose of URIs is integration. It's basically the same story, but you are sending a particular URI in an email, and then the person who receives that email wants to check this resource out. Instead of copying this resource and pasting in some other application, the person should be able to just click on the URI and the proper application automatically gets opened and is directed to the proper resource inside of the application.
Yes. On the web, we identify this as a link.
Yes, so those Ahref things in the web, they are supposed to lead you not only to another web page within the browser, but actually also to another application and another resource in that application. Think of Spotify links or TME links, anything that opens a different application outside of a web browser. Apple is using it especially pervasively.
This is deep linking in that.
Yeah, the deep linking feature is actually making use of URIs quite extensively. So I wanted something similar to exist for Matrix, and in such a way that you could click on a link on a Windows machine and it would open a Matrix client of your choice, rather than direct you to a web browser, which would advise you to go further to a particular application and type a particular command in there to join that room. This is the way how Matrix 2 operates now.
Yes. But by necessity,
kind of clumsy.
we should say. Yeah. I mean, we should say by necessity. It just isn't. It isn't possible to deep link from the web page without the schema.
Correct, and that's what quite a few services actually live with at the moment. The thing is, when you are on an iPhone, you can live with deep linking because iPhone can detect even HTTP links of certain form or leading to a certain website in particular, whereas desktop environments have no such luxury.
Yes.
They cannot assume that an HTTP link to a particular website is actually a deep link into a particular application that they advise to install and open.
Yep.
So if you are using a schema, you can get to a particular application instead. So that's why the Matrix URIs are good. And yet another reason why Matrix URIs have been devised was, well, for the sake of representation, we actually already have a good tool. This is matrix identifiers. So for the proverbial case of napkins, you can just jot down a room alias.
Precisely.
And that would be even more concise and even more readable for a human. The issue is you can only define so much with the grammar of matrix identifiers. And if going beyond the napkin use case and going towards the email case or another messenger case, you want to direct a person to your user profile, however scarce at the moment. Like we have very basic user profiles for now, but it might change with time. If you want to direct it, you have no means of doing that. You can pass over your user ID, but you cannot pass over a link to your profile specifically. So that reduces your capabilities in terms of automating things in particular, because you have to advise, like in add verbiage for a particular person to go to a particular to use particular controls to open your profile, for example.
Yes.
And in case of a room or room settings, it also reduces your capabilities of directing the user to this particular page rather than just the timeline of a room.
Okay.
And then the home page of a particular home server, for example, is totally unrepresentable with the matrix identifier.
When you say homepage, do you mean the host name?
Consider that you have just logged in to Element.io. Where do you land?
So you would land in whatever the default room for that home server adds you to. But if
it
that
might
doesn't
not
exist,
even be a room.
Yeah.
It might be an HTML page.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the point. Now I have to admit that this particular MSC is not covering this particular use case at the moment, but it's made extensible enough to enable that kind of use cases, to open user profiles, to open home pages of home servers, or to open home pages of particular clients. All these things become possible just because you are using the unified way of representing any matrix resource ever imaginable.
Right, and let's iterate those then, because they are quite well defined. They are the room, the event within a room, the muxid, which is to say the user profile.
That's right. Well, it's actually just a user ID. It's not specifically a profile.
True.
It's just you can chat with this user, for example.
So there are three. Are there more?
As of right now, there are just these. The provisional one kind of might be a next step. The reserved one is a group ID.
Yes.
The one represented with plus sigil in matrix identifiers.
Okay.
But that's something that we're yet to come to. And then rooms are actually represented both by aliases or by IDs.
Indeed.
Whichever way you choose. Now that makes things actually interesting. We're going down the rabbit hole from here, because in order to represent room ID, you actually have to add a certain kind of routing, because not every home server is supposed to know about every room ID as users of Matrix? Unfortunately, no. And you have to add specifically the servers who are aware of those room IDs.
Yeah. So this is the
via
via
parameters
tag.
or server name parameters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is supported by the current MSC. You can just add the same in the same way as Matrix 2 works. You can add via parameters to the query piece, and it will get you to the right room.
How do we deal with URL encoding?
This has been a kind of controversial topic along the way, in particular because of that napkin case, but also because when you are out there outside of Matrix, you probably would want to type things in certain cases,
Yep.
like just to type quickly the link to the Matrix HQ, for example.
Yep.
And in those cases, you really would hate to percent encode things, especially for non-technical users. That would be just like a complete no-go. Unfortunately, when you are looking at the definition of the URI in the RFC 3986, you cannot go with our existing sigils without percent encoding them.
Right.
And one sigil is particularly standing apart in this particular regard, and it's a hash.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the room alias sigil, exactly the one, the most used one.
Yep. Certainly.
And exactly the one that you would want to use when you are pointing a person to a Matrix HQ.
Exactly that.
So I had to make a tough decision: either dismiss with the sigils completely and replace them with something else, or still live with encoding sigils in a proper way.
Yep.
And ultimately, after a lot of discussion, after a whole lot of thinking, and actually that's where the long course of preparing this proposal,
which we should say, it's been more than a year now since this has been in discussion.
Almost 2 years, I'd say.
Okay.
And the whole problem statement has been even before that. Like it's as long as 2017, I believe, maybe even 16.
Yeah.
Because it was born as issue number 455 originally, one of the very early issues in GitHub on the Matrix doc. And that's where it came to be. My 2312 is a kind of reiteration of the older proposal.
Okay.
Now, so when it comes to actually encoding or not encoding sigils, after a lot of thinking, I thought that since we're using those just for integration in the first place, and we're still going to write room aliases on a napkin, perhaps it wouldn't be so bad if we use just ordinary English words, the shortest possible, to designate which kind of identifiers we're using here.
Okay.
So the way this works now, it actually can be the URIs. The side effect of that is that URIs can be pronounced in a reasonable way. So I can say matrix room matrix.org.
Okay.
And that would I dropped a lot of colons and slashes in the middle, but it's pronounceable.
I see.
So it's actually matrix colon room slash matrix colon matrix.org, and it's matrix HQ.
Interesting. So let's write it out. So it's matrix colon.
Yeah. Then it's room.
Yeah.
The word room.
ROOM slash.
Yeah, ROOM.
Yep.
Slash matrix colon matrix.org.
Right. Okay. So as you'd expect. So really, what you're doing here is replacing the hash with a room colon.
It's room slash.
Room slash. Pardon me.
Yes. and it works in a similar way for other for other IDs. My own ID would be matrix user / kitsune matrix.org, and a group would be specifically matrix group / blah blah blah, and so on. So it's pronounceable, and I think this is also good because we still talk quite a bit.
We do. What do you think about internationalization? One of the advantages of sigils is that they don't require an English understanding.
That's correct, and that was something that's been raised throughout the discussion of the proposal as well. There are two aspects here. First, I really tried to use the simplest possible words for that, and I don't expect the vocabulary to grow too fast. And then, come on, we have to accept that the IT world is dominated by English anyway.
Indeed. I mean, I find it amusing to see that almost everybody in the discussions of this topic is English second language, and some of the most passionate arguments have come from people for whom English is not their first language.
That's right. And in fact, English is not is my first language either.
No.
So I do appreciate that argument in the first place. The other point, the other aspects of that is the way the URIs for Matrix are designed now. It leaves a lot of room for making synonyms. So I can imagine that someone will devise a way to do internationalized URIs for example, users, and in German it would be matrix Benutzer / blah blah blah. The downside of that, though, is that we don't have the common denominator anymore, and we will have to engage the home servers into resolving those URIs, because to engage the clients in resolving URIs in every single language is against matrix ideology, where we put all the burden on the servers.
Indeed.
So that's something that we would have to think of separately. Another approach of fixing the same thing is actually to get back and introduce the way to represent IDs through sigils. Something like matrix ID / and note that I'm still not resorting to any kind of I don't know, whiteboard or anything. I'm just pronouncing all those.
Yep.
So matrix ID / and then the full ID including the sigil, like actual hash matrix : for example.
Okay, that
would work as well.
Yep.
And that's something that's being discussed in the proposal. It's left for another MSC as of right now. We'll see how it goes. I don't have particular reservations on which version would be better, which would win. I can easily imagine that there will be another introduced for IDs, and that would come more convenient in the end.
I love the idea.
I just leave room for that.
Yeah, I love the idea of being able to pronounce these based on what is English, but is still pronounceable and common language for enough people who would be using it. So yeah, that's a.
On conferences, you're still using English in quite a few places, for better or worse.
It's a fascinating thing. I assume while we're on the topic, then I suppose the Red Hat office in Holland is speaking English, I imagine.
Well, here in the Netherlands, it's an interesting situation. The thing is, most of the Dutchmen, and especially in the Amsterdam, they are bilingual. They speak perfect English, like the vast majority of them. At the same time, they respect their own language. So, in fact, back when I've been visiting the office spoke almost exclusively Dutch.
Okay.
And specifically in cases when they needed to talk to me or another non-Dutch speaking person, of which there were maybe 3 across the whole office, Well, it's a small office after all. It's just like 100 people.
Okay. Okay.
The actual office population is about 50 maybe. Well, then they switched to English without any problem whatsoever, which I very much like after spending time in Tokyo, where it was a complete disaster every time when a Japanese had to switch to English.
Right.
I'm sorry for my Japanese colleagues who listen to that, but folks, your English is terrible.
I mean, they're in a different part of the world. The Netherlands and England are just across the water, and English is commonly spoken in Europe, of course.
Yeah, but when it comes to intra-office chatting, it's mostly the local language.
Right.
It's
okay.
the same story in the German office of the Red Hat. Again, like there are plenty of things happening in English, but the common spoken language there is, of course, German.
Okay. All right. I mean, I raised this not out of anthropological interest, but to find out how it affects your thinking about the about the schema.
I'm a huge I'm a huge fan of English, and in particular British English, and that affects my decision making quite drastically. So don't ask me.
Okay,
all those words in Matrix URI schema are ultimately just because I wanted to stick a few things from my favorite language there.
We're on it. Okay, so let's talk about the process, because it's been quite a long time coming. Obviously, the MSc process has become more formalized over the last couple of years, but nonetheless, it's become, I would say, one of the more heated processes, or proposals under discussion. How do you feel about it now, in as much as I know that this is something that you for a while didn't want to take a lot of time on, and it's grown so much?
Well, the way it happened, I actually really liked, because it took its time to mature. There were plenty of discussions, including rather heated ones, but fortunately not too religious.
And always respectful. I mean, it's always good people.
Yeah. That's something I'm really happy about in the Matrix ecosystem. That fortunately, most of the discourse is quite civil, at least around the spec. Now, with that said, most of the discussions and most of the contentious things, they were ultimately settled in the work in progress stage of this MSc, or kind of formal work in progress, because in fact it's been the time when it was maturing, when it was kind of getting to its proper state, because again the discussion started very long ago, and there were times when we just started with what if we throw at the URI parser literally our matrix identifiers? What could possibly go wrong? Well, we quickly found out that everything will go wrong with those room aliases in particular. And user identifiers, mix IDs don't really fly with most of URI parsers either, as they are. So we had to figure out how to properly put them for most of URI parsers after that. And that was back in, I think it was 2017. Since then, it was mostly like figuring out the best form, cutting away all the numerous alternatives, which are now listed in the proposal, and I tried to describe them as exhaustively as possible to avoid coming back to the same discussions
inevitably.
So please, guys, if you feel like this is utterly wrong, first look at the alternatives, look at the argumentation there, and then come back with your counter arguments, taking on board all that discussion that happened before you. And by now, I feel that MSc is actually complete. So it's ready for the high review by the spec core team.
I see.
And I'm officially abstaining from voting on that because I'm the author.
Right.
So everybody else has to vote. And if the spec core team feels it's reasonable, then we can go on. Meanwhile, the implementation already exists within Quotient, so both Spectral and Quaternion can enjoy using the Matrix URIs right away.
Right.
Like the library will, the latest version of the library 06 will resolve those URIs and bring the correct C++ object instead. And I'm looking forward to more implementations happening anytime soon.
Great. So, what is the process for getting it in front of the spec core team? It's entered what we call FCP. Is that right?
I would be happy if someone from the spec core team first took a brief look, like scanned across the content, just in case that something seems fishy. But overall, yes, as soon as that happens, I think it's ready for FCP. And then it's either somebody shouts out in the week, or we are going on with what we have.
That's fantastic.
And don't complain there are no sigils after that.
I mean,
just bring another proposal.
It won't bring an end to the complaints or the new proposals. Like this, an end is a start in its own way. But I mean, it's a huge amount of work that you've done, and to be able to navigate this through the community discussions and finally get something something that you're proud to present, for which I say congratulations to you and everybody else who was involved in those discussions. And there were several big names there. Thanks.
URIs are in fact quite an interesting matter. There are a lot of dark corners in the specification in all the RFCs that are defined around that. So if somebody feels adventurous enough to contribute to further extension, I welcome you to a brief talk on where you should look and what you should be terrified of.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's harrowing reading in places, but all right. So we've talked quite a long time about URI schemas. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss on Matrix Live today?
Oh well, not sure. I've been spending most of my time throughout that year just moving my things over from Tokyo to Amsterdam, and then. In the rest of the time, I tried to get back to speed with Quaternion, so hopefully people felt relieved when they've seen new versions getting released in spring. I want to reassure that the next version of Quaternion is really coming together real soon now with rich text support now.
Nice.
Which occurred almost like inadvertently after one of the contributors brought a better way of representing mentions, and I suddenly found out that now the whole user experience is falling apart because I don't have rich text support. Right. So I had to add one. Along the way, I found out that HTML is really as crappy language as I thought of it. Not that I've learned something new, but parsing HTML is not a pleasant exercise.
Is this not something that's done for you by the library, by the Qt framework?
Well, for a spoiler, I'm using a really hideous trick when I'm trying to treat HTML to look at like XML and then parse it with XML parser that comes with Qt Core.
Right.
Surprisingly, that worked. Aside from a few corner cases which I managed to treat, that worked pretty well.
But
and now the next issue that we have to solve in the spec is that the subset of HTML that we're currently using, we have to somehow make it more standardized.
Right, I mean, my point was going to be that not all HTML can be nicely represented as XML, so that's going to be a problem.
Yes, but the particular thing that actually broke the experience apart was rich replies fallbacks.
Right.
Not actually the fallbacks, but rich replies themselves. MX reply itself wasn't too bad, but it turned out that there are unclosed BR tags inside, which is quite commonplace in HTML. But replies basically just use them all over the place. And that's where I had to come to grips and kind of treat HTML in a bit.
Okay.
So that's something that we will have to think how to make it better. There is another proposal, quite interesting one, in fact, about encoding rich text in the form of JSON snippets instead of HTML, and we might look this way instead.
I mean, the problem there is that you have to rely on other clients in the ecosystem to be sending that.
Exactly.
I mean,
that's the common problem across all the things that require formatting in the text. So probably just use Markdown.
Yeah, I mean, that is always an option. You can re-render the Markdown yourself.
Yeah.
It's always an option. All right.
That's all. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I want to say thank you to you. To say thanks, Kitsune. No, tell me the pronunciation again.
Well, I'm Kitsune, or just call me Alexey. Come on.
Alexey. There we go.
There's a separate story concerned with that. I called myself like this because I had to somehow separate my job, my actual identity from what I'm doing in Matrix back in 2016. Since then, it's no more really necessary. So I'm still using Kitsune, but I'm not so much discerning between Alexey and Kitsune.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe we should be calling you Alexey more often. Okay.
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
Right, I'll keep that in mind. All right, just say thank you, Alexey, and thank you, Matrix Live.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you everybody for listening.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.